In this episode, we are going to be reviewing the film noir from 1949, House of Strangers, which was directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz. It has a terrific ensemble cast, which include Edward G. Robinson, Susan Hayward, Richard Conte, Luther Adler, Paul Valentine, Ephraim Ziembalis Jr., Hope Emerson, and Esther Minciotti. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore movies from all over the world and talk about how those stories were told on film. I want to welcome back Steve Norden, who has worked as a youth and community minister for almost 20 years, and he is also a Toronto-based writer and podcaster at screenfish.net. Steve, welcome back. Thanks again for doing this.
Thanks, Robert. This is always fun, and I appreciate it.
I love that you and I both have a soft spot for noir, which is great. And I also really love when I know the guest hasn't seen the film before we agreed to do it, because there's always that curiosity of how one will take to it. So I know you hadn't seen House of Strangers before, so what did you think?
I thought it was really interesting. I didn't think it was the best example of noir, but man, Edward G. Robinson in this is just hilarious.
Oh my God, yeah.
And I thought it was a really intriguing dynamic between the brothers.
Yeah,
and the ending as well. Was not. I thought that was very not normal for film noir. The way, look, anything I'd read before it was that it was a very bloody ending, and I'm like, bloody ending. The last one we recorded was about a car backed off a cliff and everybody died within it. This is not the same thing.
Maybe they tried to market it that way at the time. Was that like an old,
No. It was just somebody's review.
Oh, really? Interesting.
It was on on Letterboxd. There were about 2 or 3 of them that referenced the bloody.
Oh, really?
Ending. I'm like,
okay.
What have you seen, man?
That is odd.
But no, I actually really liked it. I really did like it. I thought the dynamic between the brothers was interesting. I think Max is a fascinating character.
Yeah.
Is it, like I said, is it the best film noir I've seen? No, but it was good. I liked it.
This is one of those films that may fall in a noir or not category, because it's not an obvious noir in terms of photography or femme fatales or doom protagonist, but it's much more of a psychological family drama. But then it has, I would say it uses noir elements as opposed to being a straight noir. And I was curious, where or if you see the noir in it, and where they may have expressed that.
Well, that's interesting you say. I like the fact that you talked about it, sort of noir elements, because throughout much of the film, I didn't see many of them in terms of structure or visual stylization, especially during the flashbacks. It opens strongly noir, it closes strongly noir in its visuals.
Yeah.
But for much of the middle, other than the fact, that it's really about betrayal, that it almost feels to me like it was a product of the era as opposed to a straight up noir. The filmmaking of the era would have been so heavily influenced by noir that it may have creeped in, but it really wasn't the best example of the genre.
Yeah, because it's 7 years, so it's 32 to 39 is the whole story. And the main things that I saw that struck me as noir, something that I see less talked about with the themes of noir, is money just being a huge motivator, and that people want it at all costs, and how much it affects the relationships within a lot of the noir stories. You certainly saw that in the John Garfield noirs, like Body and Soul, who the boxer who was so ambitious, and then everything went from being about boxing to being about money, and how it was destroying his relationships. And for me, Gino, who played by brilliantly by Edward G. Robinson, here's this guy who was a barber, worked 16-hour days, and they lived in a very small place, recent immigrants to New York from Sicily, and four children. And suddenly he becomes this really successful banker. And that is all that matters. And everything that he does is flaunting his money, even not only to his customers, but to his children. And, you know, Mankiewicz, who is really, really clever at infusing humor with these really dark stories, because as we know, life is never just, you know, one feeling. It's a roller coaster of feelings. And I couldn't help but laugh when he shows up. Not only does he show up at the bank, but he shows up late because he feels he can go whenever he wants. You know, he tells his son Joe at the beginning is like, "Hey, a bank opens in 10 minutes," and there he is in the bathtub. It opens when I get there, you know, and he has his son scrub his back. I just thought, and then there he is with this massive car. It reminded me of The Godfather. Actually, this is like almost like a precursor to that, like a lot of similar themes. And this massive car with this chauffeur, and like he's loved in this community by everyone because he's so generous with lending money to everyone. And the irony is that he thinks he's doing the right thing, but he's actually really a loan shark at the end of the day. That's why he gets busted, because he just thinks that he could, you know, lend money and charge them ridiculous interest rates, which is loan sharking. And then if they don't pay, he basically took their assets. And he's just, it wasn't, the interesting thing is, it was not his intent to do anything wrong. Like, he honestly thinks he's helping people because he's totally ignorant. But what I found really interesting was how he would call Joe, you know, he would tell his oldest son, "Get back in your cage," at the bank. He would only let one of the sons, who was the boxer, be the doorman because he told him he was stupid. And then he told the other son that he was weak. And the only one he really liked was Max, because Max was a lawyer. He was more successful, success in the way that Gino looks at success. So that is a classic hallmark. That's more of a post-World War II thing, with consumerism and America's capitalist thinking, that money is the only value in life. And he totally destroys his family. So as a result of flaunting his quote unquote success in front of them. And to me, that was that to me is one of the most interesting themes in noir, because that is universal. I mean, people do that to this day. I was curious if that was something that popped out to you at all.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because that was one of the things I love about it, is everything in this house is opulent. It just over the top. Everything is excess.
The music, the paintings, the food.
yeah, it's crazy. Like, the mantle has like so many, like not just you know, things on it. Just not just. It's all ornate. Everything is ornate. Like you said, he pulls up in the massive car, and yet he's so likable.
Yeah,
he is so incredibly likable and like generous, you know. He seems that way.
Yeah.
And even you know, in the middle of the trial, he gets up and starts screaming at the guy.
Oh yeah.
He's like, yeah, well, my horse died. And he's like, "That's not my fault. That's your fault. You're a horse killer." From him, success is the marker of, well, I was going to say success is the marker of success, but that's redundant. But I mean, the marker of a man is success, to him, for sure. And it's interesting to me because of all the characters, it seems to matter the least to Max. Maybe it's because he has
That's true.
become like maybe it's because of him becoming a success. You know, he's a lawyer. The other guys are not. I
Mhm.
think he makes a comment at. I think Gino makes a comment at one point saying that what is right when he goes out of the bank, or something. He says, "Well, you're going to find a new job if you don't start doing what I tell you to," or stuff like
Oh,
you're
to
going to
his
find
oldest son,
to his
Joe.
oldest son,
Yeah,
Joe,
yeah.
and but the ones that are most dependent on him are the ones that are most like him. In It's really interesting.
That it, yeah. You mean out of the sons? You
Out of
mean?
the sons, out of the
Yeah,
sons.
yeah, yeah. That's true. I didn't think of it that way. It's he it's almost as if he hates himself and he sees things in them he um that he sees in him, qualities in them that he sees in himself that he doesn't like. Like, for example, he's constantly calling the boxer who he makes the doorman dumb, that he doesn't use his brains. And then the irony is that he does not use his brains in terms of how to run that bank at all. I mean, he had no understanding of the fact that you cannot just give out these loans and charge whatever interest you want, because as they go into it in the film, was that they have to have collateral. Like, if you give them a loan, they have to have something collateral in order to do it. And he was just ignoring all of the rules. And it made me laugh once he gets caught, because Max, his son, says, "Hey, didn't you read I forget the exact line, but it was like, didn't you read the guidelines or the book, or the updated version?" And he's like, "I didn't even read the original version."
Yeah.
Oh God, that killed me. So that's interesting, because I didn't look at it that way. And here's Joe, the oldest son, who he's intentionally keeping at low wages. And he says, later on when they have this big blowout, he says it's because, "Hey, I don't want you to forget what it's like to be poor. That's why I keep you at good wages, so you don't become," says something along the lines of, "you don't then have a big ego." And I'm thinking, big ego? You have the biggest ego ever, So and then he tells the other son he's weak, but I'm like, yeah, but you clearly are weak because you have so much to prove. So were those some of the qualities that you saw, that he was sort of that lashing out at his sons, but those were things about himself?
Oh, for sure. By the way, one of my favorite lines he says is, "For a few dollars more a week, I could have had a good son." First time I learned this, I'm like,
Oh my
yes,
God.
that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
But see, that's what I thought was so interesting about his character, is because he's a fighter. Now, Pietro is an actual fighter,
Yeah.
and he's
Yeah.
not good at it.
Right.
You know, he's got a weak stomach. I think that they said, so
Yeah.
he's getting into fights, he's getting into scraps, and he's going down. And his other brothers are like this. The only one that seems to be able to come out is Max.
Yeah.
So I think from Gino's perspective, like you say, trying to keep him down, he's trying to make him fight, because that's what he did.
Yeah.
He had a barber shop and he fought his way up based on the help of others. So he's going to use that to help others. He doesn't have a clue what he's doing, um, but he's going to use it that way. So I think in his warped mind, the further he pushed the thumb down on his other kids, the more he was trying to get them to rise up.
Right.
Which sort of
Right.
comes out at the end, which is interesting at the end, because Max is there and he's saying, "This is what Pa wants you to do. This is what
Yeah.
Dad wants you to do," because it was.
Yeah.
Now, did he want to kill his son? No. In fact, the ultimate betrayal for him is the fact that he accuses Joe of phoning in Max, of calling in Max's transgression or whatever. Transgression isn't
Yeah.
quite the word, but you know what I mean, with the juror.
That's right.
So what I think from him is not even that he sees himself in them; it's that he wants to.
I see. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
he wants to see them fight their way up to
Yeah.
earn that spot. Does it work? No. Well, in some
Right.
ways, maybe it does, because what they do is they just kill the beast and take the throne. But no, it's really interesting how this is a family, I think, they don't, their view of love is so warped.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so and actually their mother even says at one point, you're four men full of hate,
Yeah. Yeah. At
and
the
that's what it
funeral.
is
Yeah.
at the funeral.
When he died. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really well said, and that's exactly it, because he only sees life one way, which is this capitalist way of looking at things, which is money, 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 money. And I liked early in the film when Pietro comes with a bandage on his face, and he's like, "What happened to you?" And he's like, "Oh, hey, he had a great fight last night." And he's like, "Hey, did you get any right away? Did you get any money for it?" He's like, "Well, no, it was just an it's just an amateur fight." And then
Yeah.
to him, it's worthless. And when he does show up later at the fight when Pietro loses, I mean, my heart broke for him because he was wearing that robe that said Manetti bank and loans, and then on the back, and then once he loses, his father took it off, and I just thought, oh my god, like that is just the worst parenting ever. But at the same time, the film is told with the utmost empathy for every single character, because you understand where he's coming from, and you understand that he just really doesn't know any better. That he has the right intentions, but his intentions are how he carries things out are ultimately abusive towards his son, which then instills hatred in them to turn on him. And what's interesting is that in the first half of the film, even though there certainly is humor, I felt so bad for the sons. And then once the father needed the sons, when he has to go to trial for these crimes, they totally turn on him, and then I felt bad for him. That speech he has in the bedroom. I mean, Edward G. Robinson is such a good actor that I honestly I really I really believed him when he said, "This is why I kept you as a doormat, because you got to start using your brains." You know, I mean, obviously that's terrible, but it was just the conviction in the fact that he was reaching out to them and telling him what he wanted for them, which is, we all parents have those feelings. They want good things for their son, but just unfortunately for him, as you said, it is totally warped. But then the sons turn much more into the antagonist. I mean, even I was like, come on, guys, you're being really, like, they take the bank from him. They, they tell him not to even go to the bank. They really, I mean, I can understand feeling resentment for the way where he was treating them. But there were, often, as I'm sure you would agree with families, even, you see their flaws may really bug you or hurt you, but sometimes people, good families will find a way to still love each other because there are good traits that they see in one another, or there is some kind of history or love there. But with them, it was no. I mean, they felt nothing for this man, which I get. Again, it's empathetic, because on the one hand, I get it. I do get it because of the way he was with them. But wow, that was really something. I don't know if you felt you were kind of swaying both ways in terms of being for one side and then being for the other.
It's funny. I think I was more Gino, even though Gino was horrendous. I was more Gino all the way. I'll tell you, and I'll tell you why. Because the brothers, they never showed me in this film that they were trying. So it was
Right.
hard for me to be empathetic for them, because they just expected everything to be handed to them.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah.
Every, you know what,
I didn't
this
think
is
of it
sort
that
of,
way.
well, this is sort of a warped analogy. So go with me on this just for a moment. Just been thinking about this movie a lot lately. In some ways, it reminds me of a twisted Wizard of Oz. And I say that because it would be as if the wizard intentionally crushed the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Cowardly Lion, and kept them down,
Right.
leaving the Emerald City out of reach and saying you're forbidden. Because all of these three characters sort of exemplify those sort of characteristics. You've got
Yeah.
the strong man who doesn't have much going on up, in his brain, and the cowardly one who says nothing. Like, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And you've
Yeah.
got this opulent overlord, but he's instead of inviting them, he's keeping them down.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But the others at the same time, they really, those three brothers, their main complaint is, Dad, why aren't you giving me more?
That's
Um,
true. Yeah. Yeah, because
Max is the
Joe
only one
wants a raise, and he's looking for a raise throughout the film. That's what he wants, a raise from his dad, right?
because he's his son.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah.
It's give me what I deserve as your son, who and you've made the money.
Yeah.
And I think for that sort of reason, I really empathize with Gino a lot throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Even though, like, he is not a good dad. I'm not
Right.
suggesting he is, but the brothers are not good sons.
Yeah.
Max is a fascinating character to me. We talk about the three brothers. Max is fascinating to me because he's sort of his own man in terms of success. Um, but my goodness, his relationships are such are such a mess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is, more film noir. I think it's oh, it's not is it Barbara Stanwyck? No,
Oh, Susan Hayward.
Susan Hayward. Sorry,
Yeah.
Susan Hayward in this borders on femme fatale at times.
Yeah.
I love their banter. Oh
They were
my
great.
gosh,
I was going to ask you about that. The rapport between them, I thought apparently I believe it was Zanuck who was the head. Yeah, Zanuck, who was the head of 20th Century Fox at the time, who produced this, liked her so much that they signed her up for like a 7-year contract
mm.
because yeah, she was terrific. And I thought that their connection and their rapport, their sort of the humor they found amongst each other and the warmth, and but also the biting edge. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, it's interesting because we talked before about the other guys being filled with hate. I feel like Max is maybe the only character who almost, or at least is looking to try and understand what love really
Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
And even the fact, even though he crosses the line to go bribe the juror, you know, it's interesting because what does the juror say? She says, "You must love your
Yeah.
father a great deal," and it's like, and in a weird way, that's what that's about.
Just like his father, he's like good intent, but he goes about things the wrong way. I also found it interesting that he was engaged to this woman Maria, who's also from Italian and from Sicily, families from Sicily, and then he meets Susan Hayward, and he starts to fall in love with her, but he won't leave his fiance. And I thought that was because he felt that he had to go with like the insider, that was who the family
Mm.
would have approved of, that's who the family would have been comfortable with, and his feelings didn't matter. It's like he wants to be accepted by his father and his mother. And Susan Hayward was like the society woman. She was non-Italian, and she was a bit of a troublemaker too, right? Like she was going to like, they meet initially because she's paying him to take some cases for some shady guys, right? But it's interesting how he didn't like that about her, but he was the exact same way. Like he has a great line where he's like, "Hey, you have the sexism, which is of course plays a role in a lot of the male roles in noir," and he's like, "Hey, you have the sickness amongst women where you're falling for the wrong men who are up to no good." And then she goes, "Well, you're one hell of a psychiatrist." And I'm thinking, but you are right now falling for someone who's also perhaps not always has the best intentions and is willing to cut some corners, just like he was with bribing a judge. So he's going to judge her for this quote unquote a juror member. So he's going to judge her for for the men she goes out with, whereas he's falling for someone who's also up to some shady dealings. So again, that's where the hypocrisy of his father very much is. He has those same traits.
Well, it's interesting how much is justified in this based on just sort of like this is the way things are. And in that same speech, I think the next line after that, when she talks about him being a psychiatrist, he said, all right before that, he says, "There hasn't been a new man since Adam." And then
Right. Right.
moments later, she says, "There hasn't been a woman in love different since Eve." A new man, and it's and he goes, "Oh, okay, okay, I see." And you can see that there's this kind of balance, but then right away he says, "Oh, this is love." And she's like, "Well, yes, it is. It's, of course it's love." And I'm sitting there like, "Whoa, wait, what?"
Yeah.
Um, just on a personal note, I always think it's funny how people will get a phone call and say, "I'm getting married" in these movies, and it's like you've been gone for like a week. It's I met a guy, and the guy's like, "Hey, doll, it's like,
Yeah.
no, wait,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
I'm a little quick."
Yeah. There were some weaknesses in the film. I also found the I found the ending a little odd in terms. I mean, I know that a lot of and this is not even that conventional of a story, but a lot of conventional films will have your character arc and the character will have an change
Mm.
halfway through the story or towards the end. But I felt it was really simplistic as he's out for vengeance. He got caught
Yeah.
bribing, so he goes to jail for 7 years. And his father pumps him with all this poison, even as Susan Hayward says, your father's pumping you with hate, hate, hate. And as his father always said, his motto was never forgive, never forget. Which is a very Italian thing. As an Italian myself, it's very hard for Italians to forgive if you cross them. And I thought that was interesting that he goes home and there he is in the house and it's very dark and he just closes his eyes under the portrait of his father, and then it flashes back to 7 years before and the whole story is told, but it's not from his point of view. It's objective. So I'm not really under the I didn't think that it's just him looking back and realizing the errors of his ways. So where he suddenly were just like, yeah, I can't be so hateful. I have love in my life. And it just seemed to be like, boom, it just happened. I can see if that was perhaps the indication was that he was looking back. But again, it's not from his point of view. I don't know what you thought about that.
Well, I mean, there's no question. This was the thing. There's no question the ending is a little bit odd in that sense
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
happens so quickly. And it's not even like if they'd had a scene in during the flashback that might have actually, because I'm okay with the fact that, yeah, he was all about vengeance, but then he sits there and he thinks about it. And you know what? I'm going to change my ways. But there was no scene that got you there in the flashback. It was just you went from the funeral and now
Yeah.
he's like, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm gonna be the best I can be, dadgummit, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
be loving my heart. Let's have a drink together,
Yeah.
and it was sort of like, oh, whoa, um, and especially since after he calls his woman, I forget what her name is.
Susan
Um,
Hayward, character,
yeah,
you mean?
Susan. Yeah, but her actual character name, I couldn't remember what her character name is.
Oh, it was Irene.
Irene. So he calls Irene, and he's like, "Let's take that flight together," and
Yeah.
it's like, oh, what?
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah. It was pretty simplistic.
yeah, it was just sort of like I'm going to be the good guy. The only thing I could say in defense of it would be I did get the sense the whole way that Max was a guy who wasn't doing the right things but wanted to know how to do them. He
Right.
just didn't know. He was
Right.
raised in a house that didn't, and he has sort of a moral code, but it's also very loose. Like the fact that he's cheating on his fiance, and the dad's like, marriage is different now. It's like this is the old world and the new
I
world.
love that
It's a
scene.
great speech.
That
It's
was
like
great. He's like,
in
everything in
the
the old
old
world is
world,
flat and nothing changes. And here it just grows. It's big and everything's always changing. I thought,
bathrooms are on the outside. Now they're on the
oh my
inside.
God, that was great.
Um,
Irene did, when he comes out of jail, she does say to him, your father's filling you with poison. You gotta basically take the hate out of your heart. I mean,
yeah.
so someone, of course, did try to get through to him, and I thought that was great. He doesn't listen and he storms out. That's what, because that's a hard lesson to learn. You don't just boom, learn that. I mean, again, I know it's a movie, but you want to make it more pragmatic, right? But it was that I just thought, boom, he flips the switch. So it was sort of, and even the insight he had, like here he is like knocked out as his brothers are about to throw him off the balcony because they were concerned that he was going to have vengeance and come after them. And and of course, once the fighter Pietro turns on Joe because he was calling him an idiot, very much like the father did. That's very psychological. I like that he just snapped and turned on him because I think that's true. I think there are certain buttons people are pushed and boom, they can just turn. But the fact that Max suddenly was like, that's Pop driving you to do it. I just thought, you just came to have that to be able to communicate that so well was just too convenient for me.
See, I like that. I like that.
I like the line, but I just
see he said I think he sets it up before they box him because it's down when they're I think if I'm right, it's down at the beginning of the confrontation when the brothers arrive. He starts talking about this. You're just doing this because this is what Dad wanted you to do. So
right, okay.
So it sets it up there.
Yeah.
And I actually really liked the final confrontation between the brothers. I thought it was really well.
That was a great scene. Yeah. I did like the fact that they were willing to go that far. I mean, I was actually shocked. I'd seen this film once before, and I remember even then being like, I could understand you not speaking to him again, but like that they were willing to kill him just because they were worried he was going to come after them. I thought, my God, these guys really don't love anyone. So, which makes me wonder, did their black heart purely come from their father? Because the mother says something interesting at the funeral, which you pointed out before, is like, we used to be happy in the barbershop. We all loved each other. And then once he became successful, the hate started. So obviously the roots of these men are just buried, which you don't know why, which is interesting about the film because it includes the audience to have different takes on the motivations and the psychology of the characters. And you felt more sorry for Gino throughout the film, whereas for me it was perhaps more the second half of the film. So, and I actually just recently read a book called The Brother Mankiewicz by Sydney Stern. I'm actually having her on the show soon. And she wrote a book on Joe Mankiewicz, who directed this, and his brother Herman Mankiewicz, who famously co-wrote Citizen Kane. And it's a fascinating book about their biography and their life in Hollywood. And that's what he often said about every story he wrote was you want it, no matter what the story is, you want it to have a universal appeal so that people can identify with it. And even though this is a noir and there's a crime story in it, I mean, there's so much in this that I think every family can identify with. So many people have had maybe not a father as bad as Gino, but have maybe felt pressure to do something they don't want to do, and even on a darker side, not talking to family. I mean, it was so interesting watching this film. I was like, this reminds me of this person. This reminds me of that person. So it's universal, and it also doesn't just spoon feed everything. I mean, it does more than perhaps an art film, like someone like, a director like Cassavetes or Mike Lee. But there obviously are things that he is letting the audience know that are clearer. But there's a lot in there that is very complicated, psychologically speaking. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I think that's a good observation because this is a film that has sort of multiple perspectives and multiple characters.
Yeah.
Multiple characters.
Very Shakespearean.
Yeah. And I think this is where people can lean into the noir aspect is because everybody's got their foot in darkness and light at the same time. Gino's breaking the law, but he thinks he's doing the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Max is trying to be a good guy, but he's not doing good things. The brothers have hate in their heart, but they're being dutiful
Yeah.
along the way, just begging for their dad's approval. Like every character sort of in this film, every one of the male characters, I should say, because other than well, maybe in Irene's case as well, but Irene's motivations are far less clear, I think, throughout the film.
Right.
But certainly in the family dynamic, everybody has sort of got one foot in the shade and one foot in the light. So definitely, there's multiple perspectives by which to take, and it would be interesting to, I mean, obviously we can't have this conversation with them, but it'd be interesting to have a conversation with the Mankiewicz brothers and say, so, uh, we did this come from somewhere? Are you guys okay?
Well, yeah, Sydney Stern in the book, she mentions how Joe and Herman often they were using things from their life, like even Citizen Kane, the Rosebud sled, and that was based on Herman Mankiewicz, a bike he had in his life that he loved so much and that he lost, and his parents were like, "Well, you lost it. I'm not buying you another one." So they did use things from their life often, and Joe had a lot of really complicated relationships with women, and he was very they were both really contradictory and very complicated, and he had a real deep they both did had a real deep interest in Freud and psychoanalysis and women too. Like they were, even though of course this is male dominant, but the Susan Hayward character is complicated, and she's interesting in the fact that she falls for these, quote unquote bad boys, which is sort of like a primal attraction, I suppose. But he doesn't really tell you why that is. I mean, I love the line where where Max says you have the sickness of women, and she basically, dismisses him by saying, "Oh, you're one hell of a psychiatrist." I love that, because you don't know why she's attracted to the bad boy. She's probably one of the more ambiguous ones, but then at the same time, she's one of the wisest, and so was the mother, because they were both like, they were able to see what was going wrong with all the men. And she's right. You got poison in your heart, just like your father. And the mother, who was, because, it's a patriarchal family, she's very passive throughout the film. And there's one line where he turns to her and says, hey, isn't that right? And he's expecting her to be on her side. And she says, yes, Gino, but like she says it in a way where she just felt like she had to go along with it. And then it wasn't until he died that she suddenly felt now she's like the head of the family. And she's right. Like she says, there's hate in all of you, and poison. And, this only happened once we got rich. And it's interesting that the women were able to see that, where the men couldn't. Like they were wiser in a lot of ways, even though they were probably the least developed, I suppose. I don't know what you felt.
Well, it's interesting because I actually, what I really thought was almost I wouldn't say the opposite, but a little bit different, in the sense that I thought this film was highly, highly masculine, and the woman that has the most of a voice is the one who takes on the most aggressive role, and being Irene. Now, you're right. The mother sits silently.
Yeah.
Or they're not listened to. The mother of his fiance tries to speak up, and he says, "Sit down." Yeah.
And then he says, I couldn't help but laugh when he's like, you know what? It's still old world for us. And he's about to smack her. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is what I mean. Like, it's funny you mentioned it being like The Godfather, because this is very much like a world of men. And I would almost argue that his initial attraction to Irene, maybe she reminds him of his father. And
because she was more masculine. Like she was tough. She was confident. She took control. She made her own decisions. which was interesting to see that. Well, that's very common in noir, that the women are very driving the story, making the decisions, sort of manipulating the men and things like that. She wasn't really manipulating one, but she very much was her own person. Perhaps the only thing I thought of was when she's like gets engaged to that other guy later. I thought, well, maybe she did that to make Max jealous.
I think she says that.
Yeah, so he fight for her. Yeah. I think you're right. I think she does, and that was clever.
Yeah, like she says a line like, "I had something in my life I wanted to work out. That's why I did it," or something like that. And it was. Yeah. She doesn't say it directly, but it was suggested. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. Yeah,
she's an interesting character because there are these moments where she's in control, and there are these moments where she almost doesn't want to be. It's almost. This is what I mean. There are things about her character I think are so interesting and also so confusing.
Yeah,
because she's not a true femme fatale. She's driving the bus for the first half of the movie. Yeah, like we're crying out loud. I think he says, why don't you take your coat off, or are you you're taking your coat off already? And she says, I don't stay dressed in anything for long. And it's like, whoa. Okay.
I love that. They're always clever at getting things past the censors. I love it.
I was like, but by the end, her character is very different. There's a softness, and maybe that's as Max sort of balances out, because Max, although he's filled with hate, he sort of balances out by the end. He says, I've come back to life, Pa, which suggests he was dead the whole time. Which is really...
I guess the suggestion was that because she brought it out of him, like the love from her brought that. It just, as I said, it was done in a very kind of wrapped up, abrupt way. But even though, it has its share of weaknesses, but I think it's a strong, complicated and emotional film. One thing, when I was watching it, I was like, now that I read this book and I know more about Joe and the way he wrote, was that even though he's not credited as the writer on this, because the writer, it's actually Philip Jordan, but he wrote the first draft, which the head of 20th Century Fox, I believe, hated, and they fired him. And then Joe actually rewrote it, the whole thing, the story. So it's based on a book, but I don't know the ins and outs of how Philip adapted the book and then how Joe rewrote it, but apparently he rewrote all the dialogue and the story, and the only reason he wasn't credited was he only wanted sole credit, and Philip Jordan apparently fought it at the guild, and they as a compromise, they said, okay, share co-writing credits, and Joe was pissed off, and he's like, either I get whole credit or forget it, just give it to Philip Jordan. Apparently he always had conflict with this guy. Apparently Philip Jordan, during the blacklisting, put his name on a lot of scripts that blacklisted writers wrote. So apparently he was talented, but he was often a front for a lot of things. But that dialogue, wow. I mean, the humor, the band, like, it's so, I mean, no one writes like that anymore. And I think it's because, and I learned this in the book, was that so many writers back then, and you got to attribute this to Herman, was that they were all like newspaper guys, and apparently once talkies came in, one of Herman Mankiewicz's jobs was to go to New York and recruit writers. And because he worked in the newspaper business, he was a theater critic, and also using theater writers, playwrights. They were his buddies, and he was like, hey, they need us, we're gonna have to go to Hollywood. So you got a lot of that rat-a-tat, that just like that dialogue that is works on so many levels, not just like a one-liner, but are so truthful at the same time, because it said so much about like a guy like Gito, when he at the dinner table, when he sees Max kissing his fiance, and of course the mother's like, hey, no kissing, and then he's like, hey, when I was engaged, we kiss all the time, and then she goes, no, not until we're married, and then he's like, it's not so fun after. You know, and I just thought, wow, that is totally what a guy like that would say. Yeah. You know, so you don't see that anymore. I mean, no one writes like that anymore because I don't know, that newspaper, old style newspaper writing is unfortunately is not something I can't think of anyone who writes like that. I'm sure there is someone. I just can't off the top of my head see it.
I would say the closest example of that I can think of off the top of my head is good Sorkin.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's Sorkin. Sorkin has that ability.
Yeah.
Right. It's not common. And even a back and forth between leads. Well, it was interesting. What was I saw that new one with Bullock and Tatum. I forget what it's called, The Lost City. And I'm like, right. Even the rom-com of that pairing, it's just not that genre isn't as prominent as it used to be, let alone good ones.
Right.
But Sorkin seems to be able to find that balance when he writes a good script.
Yeah.
You know, Social Network, that for opening scene in Social Network is pretty darn close.
Yeah.
Where they're sitting around in the bar and they're talking, and it's like, man, when he's on his game, it's pretty. I think that's
he has a very distinctive language style that certainly is more common with amongst playwrights like David Mamet or Sam Shepard. Yeah. And there's not as many playwrights writing scripts. I don't know. I could be totally wrong, but I know that back then that was like the norm. I mean, where else were they going to go for dialogue? They were going to go to the theater because this is the new age, right, of dialogue. So it's pretty fascinating. But I'm glad you liked it. I loved it as well. Again, I'd seen it before, and I loved it even more the second time, despite its weakness. So thanks so much, Steve, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you. You know, I'm always up for it, and this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it. And yeah, the film's great, and I appreciate the chance to chat with you about it.
Yeah, me too. And where's the best place for people to find your podcast and follow you on social media?
Oh, well, you can find us. We have our own podcast on YouTube, Screenfish Radio. Just look up Screenfish. And on there, we've got lots of interviews with industry professionals. We've got Screenfish Radio, which is our film dialogue podcast as well. We are available wherever podcasts are on, or you can go to the you can go to the website at screenfish.net, where we've got lots and lots, even more reviews, hopefully new stuff, mostly daily, from all sorts of content, and hopefully you'll be able to check us out.
Great. All right. Well, I will leave the links in the description box below for where you can get in touch with Steve and follow him on social media and check out his wonderful podcast. So, Steve, thanks again, and let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Robert. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and or listening. If you are currently listening to this on the audio version of the podcast and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode that I've ever created can be found, youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. I also want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. Patreon is bonus content that I create month in and month out, and it is based on polls that I put out at the beginning of every single month, which you, of course, as a member, will have access to vote on. So if you're interested in becoming a member and supporting me on Patreon, head over to the link for full details. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my channel by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.